Okay, so if you guys have been following my channel at all recently, you'll know that I've been showing a lot of interest in a new Disney Channel series called Amphibia. I've been making a lot of broad claims about it, mostly consisting of how I feel that the show has a lot of potential to be a very interesting mystery and lore-driven show, which builds its mystery and its lore in the background a lot like shows like Gravity Falls and Steven Universe often do, while also focusing on comedic A-plots which further the characterizations of its lead characters and teach useful lessons to the kids who might be watching it. And while I am kind of upset that Disney is giving it the same treatment that they gave Star vs. the Forces of Evil in its final season, airing many of its episodes very quickly, very close together, and therefore are ruining the pace of what otherwise could be a great show, I do have hopes that they'll eventually calm down with that shit and start airing it more regularly and maybe even give it a chance to shine by unfolding at a regular pace. If they do, I think it could be a real and true hit in the same vein of the other shows that I've already compared it to in this video. That said, this particular video aims to do something I think pretty interesting. I'm going to taking information from just the first 2 episodes, or the first 2 half-episode segments of the first episode, I'm going to attempt to map out the general direction of the story as it's going to progress throughout its run. And I'm going to be doing that by attempting to prove that Amphibia is drawing inspiration from a particular subgenre of anime, of all things. Though, to be fair, that's not an entirely ridiculous notion. Look at one of the shows that I have compared it to, Steven Universe, a show which draws very heavily from anime tropes. I'd even go so far as to say that Steven Universe qualifies as a Western shonen anime, an anime with action elements which is traditionally marketed at young boys, though it does make use of tropes from the magical girl subgenre as well, which crosses over quite a bit with shonen titles from time to time, but isn't really the same thing. If Steven Universe, though, is a Western magical girl anime or a Western shonen anime or some hybrid of the two, I really think that Amphibia is being set up as a sort of Western take on the Isekai subgenre. Isekai translating literally to different world. That's right. Isekai is defined specifically as a subgenre of Japanese fantasy light novels, manga, anime, and video games revolving around a normal person from Earth being transported to, reborn in, or trapped in a parallel universe, often one which already exists in the protagonist's world as a fictional equivalent. Though there are, of course, variations where the world they end up in is completely unknown to them. That's absolutely correct, and to use an example that I'm sure a lot of people my age will at least be somewhat aware of, my personal favorite example of an isekai anime is Digimon. Every time that show spends 3.5 minutes transforming Puppermon into bigger Puppermon, I just eat it right up. And that's not even a joke about how long the transformation sequences take. I mean, it kind of is, but it doesn't change the fact that I am serious. I really do eat that up. And I'm sure a lot of you guys who are familiar with Western storytelling tropes and the terms used to define them are probably wondering, hey AJ, isn't that effectively a fish out of water story? And that's actually a good catch. The two have a lot in common. The difference is that a fish out of water story can be anything from someone ending up on a different world or in a different time than where they started, but it can also include things like characters from Europe coming to New York, or something along those lines. Any story of someone ending up somewhere that is unfamiliar to them, and the story, at least in part, centering around them, coping with these new surroundings, would qualify as a fish out of water story. Isekai is a bit more focused than that. There is almost always some magical element, or as is more common in modern Isekai stories, a pseudo-scientific element which is pretty indistinguishable from magic, which led to the person ending up in the world different from their own. And according to the flashbacks that we got in those first 2 12-minute episodes, as well as the scenes in the opening sequence to each episode, it's absolutely clear that Anne and her 2 BFFs from Earth ended up in Amphibia due to the magical intervention of the music box with the 3 gemstones and the frog carvings on it, that she was peer pressured into stealing from a shop by said friends. And just so you guys know, this is something that I only learned recently, music boxes are not actually meant to send people to different worlds, which does flat out confirm that there is a magical element at play here. Now Anne is stuck in Amphibia, and there are forces at work which prevent her from even making an attempt to return home, at least yet, as during the time of year in which she ended up in Amphibia, the mountains which surround it are virtually impassable, and therefore she cannot make a trek over them. She is now forced to live within this world, coping with her new surroundings, which of course leans a bit more towards the fish out of water side of Isekai. But what really cements this as an Isekai story is something that we see in the very first episode, when Anne moves to hold back the attack of the giant red mantis creature, and the giant red mantis creature in defense of Sprig. We actually see something interesting happen. For just a second, her eyes, which are normally, I'm assuming that's supposed to be brown, it's kind of hard to tell, actually flash blue. And then later, when we see her open up the music box again, attempting to have it return her home, no doubt, we see that the 3 gemstones on it are clear. But if we go back to the opening sequence, and to that brief scene where Anne was shoplifting the music box, the gemstones aren't clear. Each one is a different color, one of which is the same shade of blue that her eyes turned during that scene when, from what I can tell, she was holding back an attack which should have overwhelmed her pretty easily. See, there are a couple of other elements which are typically common of Isekai anime, which I haven't brought up yet. And those are what I call the destiny factor and the Isekai superpower factor. A lot of Isekai stories, particularly from what I can tell, at least older ones, include some story element where it turns out that the person whisked away to the other world, or people whisked away to the other world in the case of, again, Digimon, were always destined to end up there. They were chosen by some force, aside from themselves, to be whisked away to this other world, to be brought there on purpose, because for one reason or another they have the traits necessary to save the world from some big threat which is on its way. And they do this using their Isekai superpowers. This can be anything from a working cell phone, giving you access to modern knowledge and technology in a fantasy setting, all the way up to a set of small devices which amplify your bond with a group of tiny digital monsters, allowing you to share your energy with them, prompting them to evolve temporarily into more powerful forms, allowing them to fight against vastly superior opponents while still remaining cute and marketable. And I think what we saw when Anne's eyes glowed as she fought against that creature which should have been able to overwhelm her was an Isekai superpower. I think it's clear, especially given not only the number of gemstones, but also the stinger scene at the end of episode 2, which showed that at least one of Anne's 2 friends ended up in Amphibia with her, just in a different place, likely because they weren't all holding the music box when it did its thing, that Anne and her 2 friends were in some way destined or chosen to end up in Amphibia to thwart whatever plot the villain who is captured Anne's friend has in mind. Or maybe it'll turn out to be something like the perceived villain isn't really a villain, but they're aware of a coming threat and thought that Anne and her friends might be it. And that's the thing that Anne and her friends are supposed to stop. Going off of that information, I think we can safely say that the 3rd friend ended up there as well, and that each of the 3 gemstones imbued them with superpowers of some form. That once Anne is reunited with her 2 friends, we will, at different points in the story, see their eyes glowing the 2 colors not represented by Anne herself. And I think them getting home at the end is going to come down to them learning to control their Isekai superpowers enough that they can return the magic that was given to them by the music box to the music box, returning to the music box the power to transport them across worlds. If I'm right, if all of the details that I have picked out in this show so far are hinting at it being a Western take on the Isekai concept, I do expect that this is the direction that we're going to see the show go. And even if, let's say, they do decide to completely flip the script on this type of narrative, to purposefully subvert the tropes common to this subgenre, if I'm right and this really is the subgenre in which this show is intended to exist, that's something that we will be able to say definitively is happening, because the tropes of the subgenre are already so well known. Like, let's go back to Digimon again as an example. Because I watched Digimon as a kid, if suddenly this show starts setting up the tropes of an isekai story and then subverting them, I'm going to notice that, and it's going to add to my viewing experience. And honestly, I think that's great. Isekai is one of my favorite subgenres of anime. Seeing it receive some love in the form of a Western take, well, that's got me even more excited for this show than I already was. It also reinforces the fact that Amphibia probably has as rich and interesting lore as what I've already suggested it might. Due to the nature of the genre, the other world that the isekai protagonist or protagonists end up in tend to have deep, rich mysteries to them. I mean, hell, you could even say that Steven Universe even has some isekai elements, as even though Steven lives on Earth and has interacted with the crystal gems most of his life, there is almost an entire separate world of crystal gem bases and temples scattered across the Earth, and that every time he goes to one of them, he's participating in an isekai-esque plotline where, through those locations, the mysteries of his world, which just happens to be more fantastical than he thought it was, are slowly revealed to him. That's the kind of thing that I expect from Amphibia. A slow burn reveal of this world's lore accompanied by mystery elements which will be solved as the series goes on. I imagine that the world itself is going to be the biggest mystery aside from why Anne and her friends are there. And again, that's all literally just my takeaway from watching the first two 12-minute episodes. I can't imagine how much I'll have to say after I've caught up on the rest. You know, assuming that Disney gives me a chance to catch up on them. As per usual though, guys, what do you think of any of the ideas that I put forth in this theory video? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below or over on my Discord, link in the description. But either way, this has been AJ22 and I will talk to you guys later.